Every piece of clothing I own lives inside this ornate 1940s wardrobe. Welcome to the world of capsule wardrobes. Okay, that's not strictly true, but the majority of clothing that I own really does live inside this wardrobe. And is it because of my Tetris level organisation? Partly, but it's also because I live by a capsule clothing plan, because I didn't want to join the rest of the world as a mindless consumer. I wanted to downsize while still having a nice selection of stylish outfits. And if that sounds like something that you're interested in, then me and my 1940s wardrobe are here to help you by showing you how you can curate your very own capsule wardrobe. We have got too many clothes. There's no denying it, the consumption of clothing has grown exponentially since our grandparents' and great-grandparents' time. In the 1930s, for example, the average woman would have owned around 60 items of clothing and bought about 5 new items of clothing a year. And during the Second World War, a rationed woman would have bought around 10 new items of clothing a year. And this stayed the same throughout the 50s, and you would keep an item of clothing going for at least around 10 years. Nowadays, however, in the UK, a woman will buy on average 64 new items of clothing a year and 68 in the US, which means that we have around 300 items of clothing in our wardrobes. But finally, it appears that clothes shopping is starting to falter. And in 2016, it was reported for the first time in 7 years that clothes shopping had dipped. These days, people would rather save their money and spend it on experiences, or just wait for a discounted version of the same item, or for a cheaper version later down the line, which reduces impulse buying, or if you're like me, you just buy everything second-hand. Honestly, don't knock it till you tried it. But with the internet offering an instantaneous click and buy experience and the death of the high street, we're still buying to excess. And get this, people only keep an item of clothing on average for 2 years. And this could be because, in my humble opinion, the 2020s doesn't really have a recognisable look or a decade-defining fashion, unlike decades before. But regardless, we are wasteful and we're overbuying clothes for homes that are much smaller than they used to be as housing prices go up. Personally, I think that the 1940s had a much more striking style than the 2020s, and that was with people living on a clothing ration. So let's try and rectify this by kicking it like a wartime wardrobe and having a make, do and mend, more grateful attitude rather than one of overconsumption and filling our landfills. But what was actually in a 1940s capsule wardrobe? How many items of clothing do people purchase a year? And how can I build an authentic capsule clothing plan? Well, I'm going to help you. High street shopping, which had just begun in the 1930s, slowed as shortages prevented stores from offering a full range of goods, so people adapted and improvised. In the early 1940s, the average wardrobe of a middle-class woman consisted of 7 dresses, 2 or 3 two-piece suits, a similar number of skirts, 3 overcoats, 1 mackintosh, and 5 or 6 pairs of shoes split between the seasons. A poor woman might have only had 3 dresses, 1 skirt, 1 or 2 overcoats, and 1 or 2 pairs of shoes. A middle-class man might have 3 suits, 2 overcoats, and 4 pairs of shoes. Whereas a poor man might only have 1 suit, 1 overcoat, and a pair of shoes or clogs. The difference between classes was surprisingly little, for example, working-class farmers versus middle-class city families. More income only meant spending more on clothing items, not necessarily buying more. The exception was young single women who spent more on dresses, shoes, and hats every year than any other age group. Upper classes also bought more variety of clothing, sports clothing, and formal wear. Men's 1940s clothing usually cost more than women's but lasted longer and was purchased less often. Working classes spent more time sewing and repairing clothing at home, a task required even more so during wartime, and make, do and mend was the motto of the decade. Men's clothing, however, was almost never homemade, except for knitwear like socks, vests and sweaters. Clothing was replaced only as needed, not because the fashion trends changed, and only 10% of income was spent on clothing. Less was spent on lingerie or specialty items like raincoats. Free clothing such as flower sack dresses and aprons helped stretch a budget, and church charity bins were necessary places to shop for the struggling family. A moderately priced and purchased dress was expected to last 1.5 to 2 years. Poor women mended more often instead of replacing clothes, expecting good dresses to last 2 to 3 years before being recycled into aprons and children's clothes. Okay, let's just pause there. I know this is a lot of history-heavy stuff, but before I teach you how to curate your own wardrobe, I wanted you to learn from the best, which in my opinion is the 1940s, where they were literally under a clothing ration, and so they had no choice but to live within their means. And so I'm using them as an example, kind of like a template. And so I'm going to show you the typical outfits in a capsule wardrobe for a low-income family in the 1940s to a wealthier family in the 1940s, starting with the farming family. Now, this woman would have slayed today because her wardrobe revolved around housework, gardening, grocery shopping, and attending church. She lived in her cotton house dresses and apron. Cottagecore before it was cool. Her church outfit would have been her nicest dress, hat, and stockings. These were simple rayon dresses, or sometimes a newer cotton house dress if that's all she could afford. Her clothing would be a mix of purchased, homemade, and upcycled garments, also a mix of seasonal items. Notice that there are no pants or trousers, but she would borrow her husband's pants, overalls, gloves, and rubber boots to do farm work. Here's a list of clothing for the average farming male. The 1940s farmer would have worn the same workwear clothes all week, only changing into nicer clothes for Sunday church and then back to workwear. His heavy-duty overalls or trousers with sturdy work shirt and a pair of boots kept him reasonably clothed throughout the seasons. Now, the low to middle class woman had a bit more expendable income and time to read about the latest fashions. She may have purchased new dresses from a local shop or mail order catalogue. Her selection of clothing wasn't any different than that of the farmer's wife, just a bit more of it and a higher quality. While she tended to chores during the day, she may have had more time to visit with friends, volunteer for charity, or work a part-time job. She would dress well but frugal for these public occasions. Again, no pants or trousers were listed, but many young women wore a pair of casual trousers on the weekends, although it was still a taboo piece of clothing. The wealthier teenage girls had the most interest in new fashions and the most desire to follow trends. They also grew fast and needed new clothing frequently. Teens wore casual clothes like shorts, rompers, jeans, and play suits, and these were worn for activities outside of school. This only added to their vast wardrobe compared to their mothers. Wealthier women would have had similar capsule wardrobes with additional jewellery, accessories, and furs. The city girl's clothing lasted longer than a farmer because she had more wardrobe to circulate through, as well as the ability to purchase higher quality garments. Today's capsule wardrobe plan is also great if you're a modern person but with a flair for the vintage aesthetic. You can create a wearable 1940s capsule wardrobe plan using genuine vintage 1940s reproduction clothing or affordable vintage-inspired clothing. My personal preference is second-hand pieces that can be redesigned into a vintage style. And it's kind of on your budget. I feel like Susan about to journey to Narnia.
Mr. Tumnus, please take me. I've literally been waiting for you for years. Please, just one time.
Okay, a capsule clothing plan for women. We start with 10 dresses, a mix of cotton house dresses, going out rayon dresses, and party frocks. Or one suit instead of a dress, if you wish. One winter coat, one sweater or cardigan, 2 blouses, 1 to 2 skirts, 1 pair of nice pants or trousers, or workwear denim, blue jeans or overalls, 2 shoes, 1 low-heeled Oxford shoe and 1 dress heel, 2 hats, 1 all-season hat and 1 straw summer hat, 1 purse/handbag, 2 nightgowns, 1 for summer, 1 winter pyjama and 1 pair of house slippers that you can see I'm already wearing, 2 bras, 1 girdle or corset or garter belt, 5 panties, 3 cotton, 2 silky, 5 stockings, 2 backseam sheer stockings and 3 winter weight knit stockings or tall socks, 3 slips, silky slips or winter knit slips for colder climates, 10 handkerchiefs, oh, and I almost forgot, 2 aprons. And for the men, their wardrobe largely depended on their occupation. Working class or blue-collar careers needed work clothing that suits the job, whereas a professional office job required more suits and dress clothes. But here is a range of items that would be included in the male capsule clothing plan. I've also listed how much 1940s clothing would have typically cost in comparison to today's prices. With the exception of fabric, you can see that the prices of clothing are similar to today's values. Since fast fashion became trendy in the 1960s, our clothing has become cheaper but also lasts a lot less time. 1940s clothing, however, even the cheapest options were built to last a few lifetimes. So clearly this is a very extreme example, and when I see all of the items laid out like this, even I am amazed at the small amount of clothing that people in the 1940s had to work with. And please, don't get me wrong, I have way more clothes than this. Like I said, I have a wardrobe full back there. I've got shoes stored under my bed. I've got dressing gowns on the back of my door. Downstairs, my coat hooks are filled with coats. I have vintage dresses strewn about my room. So I'm not expecting you to charge towards your wardrobe and just get rid of a load of stuff. If you do, though, make sure you donate. I'm just, I guess, trying to inspire people by using a very extreme example as to how we can be more resourceful. Because although clothing rationing may not be a problem in 2024, there are many more issues that are. And I, for one, would like to be a little bit more mindful and be part of the solution.